welcome to A Valid Answer with Scott and Marshall, where a pastor and an atheist discuss all the things happening in the news and religion and politics and philosophy and all that kind of stuff. We're glad you're joining us here. We are tracking on Facebook right now, so we can see your involvement. All right, you have questions, you have comments about anything that we're saying, anything that's going on there, then definitely chime in. We definitely want to see what you have to say. We want to see where you think, where you're on, especially if you're going to cheer me on. I'm definitely going to read your posts. If you're putting down Marshall, absolutely.
You could totally boo and hiss for me. It's all good.
Yeah, if you want to be part of the peanut gallery, join in. No, actually, I love all the interaction we get. We had a really good show last week, a lot of interaction in last week's show, and just look forward to you guys sharing with that. Again, we're here every Sunday night at 5 on kerncast.com. You can follow us, A Valid Answer, on Facebook. You can email us at avalidanswer@gmail.com. And if you want to sponsor our show, you could be the very first sponsor. You could be like, we got bills to pay here. Right now, Gabriel does this all by himself. Our producer does it. Well, okay, Gabriel and Josh do it. But they do it for free because they're really good boys. And I'm not a good father because I don't pay them. So maybe Marshall's like, what? So no, we don't do this for the money. We definitely do this. Because we want to get this message out. What's the message we want to get out, Marshall?
Well, the message is we want to kind of elevate the conversation here in our community and elsewhere around the world. And we want to get people to start talking about ideas. Stop talking about the weather. Stop talking so much about the sports scores. And let's talk about, the gossip on TV. And let's start talking about
what the Kardashians did?
Right. Let's start talking about ideas. Because when people start talking about ideas, that's when change begins, because it begins to change the way you think. It changes the way you vote, the way you see the world, the way you interact with the world and one another. And it literally has the power to change the entire world. Yep. So if you don't like the status quo, if you don't like our politics, if you don't like our entertainment, if you don't like this, that, or the other thing, the way to change it is to talk about it. And more importantly, to talk about the ideas that underline all of these things that are happening in our world today.
Very, very good. Well, today's discussion comes from something that I saw somebody post on Facebook, and basically it was a study done. Okay, let me see here. It is the longest running study of human sociology, psychology, whatever it is, ever done by a guy named George Valiant.
Okay.
You're like Eddie Valiant from Who Framed Roger Rabbit. George Valiant, professor at Harvard. The study lasted over 30 years. 30 years tracking people who were born in the 1920s and 1930s and followed them all the way through, practically their whole lives, and found out where they ended up and just kept coming back to the same group of people of about 800 some odd people from different socioeconomic areas in life, and basically discovered what the 6 keys were to long life and happiness. And I'm like, okay, this sounds interesting. So I decided to read that post and discovered that Harvard agrees with me. Yeah, that for the most part, the 6 key areas that lead to long life and happiness are all based on your choices, and specifically the study shows that it was not based on your socioeconomic level of where you started or where you were, that they studied the lives of a group of Harvard graduates, they studied the lives of a group of inner city men, and a group of, the middle. Mm-hmm. Why am I blanking?
Middle class.
Middle class. Thank you. It has middle in the name. A group of middle class women. So it's about a third and third and a third that they studied all the way across there, and basically discovered that there were people from all of those groups who had long life and happiness, and people from all of those groups who did not have long life, did not end up with happiness, and that the mitigating factors did not have to do with which socioeconomic group they came from, had to do with these 6 main factors. So I'm looking and saying, that's what I've been talking about. Because all of those had to do with choices. Avoid smoking and alcohol. That's a choice. All right, what's the next one?
There's a summary at the
There's
bottom.
a summary at the bottom. You don't have that up. I keep trying to scroll through and it keeps loading up ads and it keeps pushing me back down. But you get to the bottom here. Oh, come on. So basically, yeah, here we go. Summary: avoid smoking and alcohol. Years of education is good. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
Have a happy childhood. That's the only one that not necessarily your own choice, but it is somebody's choice. Relationships are everything. Who you choose in your relationships is everything. Mature coping skills, learning mature coping skills, and generativity, which basically means people who give. The more you give back, the happier you are. So
stop asking for raises and donate all your money to charity.
That's
there
right.
you go.
That's why
Especially those of you who are poor and who are struggling to get by and have to choose between things like, food and medication. Donate the money, right? Stop asking for more.
So this is why. This longest running Harvard study ever done, peer reviewed. I'm going to now hand this over to Marshall, and he's going to explain why he disagrees with the science of this peer-reviewed study.
I don't. I don't have any.
Sorry, he disagrees with the conclusion.
Well, my issue with it is I don't know enough about the details of the study to actually disagree with it. I would imagine some peer review has happened since 2017 to go into it. I will see what I can find on that later. But for me, the underlying fundamental issue that underlines all of these choices and all of these options is ultimately economics. But it's an economic issue.
But it specifically said in each
that socioeconomic status doesn't make a difference.
Does not make a difference. And they specifically talk about that in each of these points. Talking about smoking and not smoking, talking about like even years of education, that following those who started off in inner cities, that eventually chose a way of life and eventually went to college. That the one who went to college, even for whether they came from the university, whether they came from a rich family or they came from the inner city, if they chose to go to college, and there were people in the inner city who made it to college, that it was the choice of going to college, that they were equally longevity, equal happiness, that it did not matter. Specifically, they said it did not matter which socioeconomic, region they came from or level that they came from.
Well, but I would question that because, as we all understand, people from higher socioeconomic status have a much better odds of ending up in college and doing higher education than a person from the inner city. In fact, your graduation rates on face are much different between the inner city people and people who come from higher socioeconomic status. If you come from, if you live in a wealthy district, chances are, pretty close to 90 to 100% are going to graduate from high school and go on to some form of higher education, whereas in the inner city, graduation rates may be around 50%. And so to assume that both populations are somehow equal, something's going on here with the sampling, I suspect. I don't have information. I am going to question it. Yeah, because that's a widely known fact that inner city folks simply don't make it to college as frequently as people from the top. So I'm very curious how they chose their sample.
But what I'm getting at is that the guarantee of success comes from choices, not from the economic status.
Okay, and so what I'm going to tell you though is
the guarantee of success, meaning
choices.
It doesn't. If you make these choices, this is what's going to lead to happiness and success and longevity. Not where you started, not how much money your parents made. That has less of a factor on your success and happiness than your.
But it's still a factor, isn't it?
Yes, but it's
It's much less of a factor, I would imagine. Common sense.
It's much less of a factor than your choices. Well, this one's the one that's like out of it, where it's kind of out of your hand. But basically, a happy childhood. If you had a happy childhood, now a happy childhood does not mean a rich childhood. For a quote from the book said, for both the inner city men and the Harvard men, the best predictor of a high income was not their parents' social class, but whether their mother had made them feel loved. That the choice, and again, that is a choice. You can make your children feel loved no matter where you are, unless you're going to tell me that people in Africa don't love their children. You can make your child feel loved no matter where you are. And when you do that, that choice has a greater impact on who they're going to become than does how much money you make. That choice, again, it's coming back to choice. Follow the lives of inner city men. One of the best indicators of success with aging was how well they had adapted in junior high school. Still talking about inner city men. That again, it's the choice of. It's not where you come from.
So I get all of this, but I'm telling you that economics is key because economics is generally behind any kind of human decision making, and so there has to be something going on here. I'm not sure what it is. I'm very skeptical about the conclusion that you're drawing from this study. I understand that your choices do have an impact and a bearing, but to say that it's all on you and that the society, that the economics, that the socioeconomic condition have no bearing whatsoever is, to me, frankly, astounding. It's ludicrous.
You're skeptical of a peer-reviewed Harvard study.
Well, I don't know how peer-reviewed it is yet.
Okay.
The paper was published in 2017, and I don't know how the sample was chosen because you could look at the Census Bureau stats, and they're going to tell you that people from the inner city have lower graduation rates than people from the upper strata. And yet you're telling me that more years of school mean happier people, but how many people from the inner city are likely to go on and get
Sorry, that was me. I was burping. I moved away from the
I was like, is something wrong? Did I spill on my shirt? Did I do a Scott? So all I can say right now is that I'm skeptical.
Okay.
And I don't have a published response to go back at that.
What makes you skeptical?
Because again, people from the inner city don't attend college the
besides
same
that,
as people.
That's only one of the factors. What makes you skeptical of the whole thing?
People from lower socioeconomic status, for example, probably smoke more. They're certainly exposed to more things like alcohol, drugs, and other things. So there's probably a higher incidence of drug and alcohol abuse. Families tend to be a lot more broken up. Children tend to be a lot more neglected. And again, a lot of this is economics. When you have an upper class family and you can have somebody who's staying at home with the kids, or you can hire somebody to stay with the kids, when you can hire a tutor, when you can send them to a university, generally speaking, there is a reason why upward mobility isn't what we believe it is in this country.
But even in this study, it specifically did not quantify the actual higher education. They were talking just higher education. They're talking city college. Like even someone who went to city college compared to someone who graduated from Harvard.
What about vocational training?
That
has to be defined somewhere. Now, that might not be in the article.
Yeah.
But I would imagine in the study, if the study's worth its salt, that's explained in there. Now, you might have to get the full paper.
Yeah, gotcha. But see, like the Harvard man at 8, but remarkably, the health of the college-educated inner-city man at 70 was as good as that of the Harvard man at 70. And this was in spite of the fact that their childhood social class, their tested IQ, their income, and the prestige of their colleges and jobs were markedly inferior to those of the Harvard men.
But they're both college-educated.
Parity of education alone was enough to produce parity in physical health.
That's nice. Now, what could we do to ensure that inner-city people have an opportunity for a higher education at the same rate as people from the upper class?
That would be a very good argument to make.
Right.
Nice.
So I think that's more in line with what I'm trying to say. Economics underlies everything. I do want to give everybody a quick little economics lesson here, because when we think of economics, we think of dollars and cents, dollar bills and pennies and nickels and dimes. But that's not what economics really is. Economics is more of a study of how we make decisions. In fact, there's a thing called the fundamental economic problem. And the fundamental economic problem is this: how do you meet theoretically unlimited demands with scarce resources? In other words, scarcity is the fundamental economic problem. And then there are three fundamental economic questions which are part of that problem: what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce it. Now, these are macroeconomic questions. But the way that you answer those questions gives you your economic system, whether it's capitalism, communism, socialism, or something in between. And then, of course, the end result of all of that is the options that people have for meeting their unlimited demands with their scarce resources, And capitalism usually gets high marks because generally you have more choices and you have more options.
Capitalism is one of the only, if not the only, system that allows your personal choice and your own ingenuity to break across those barriers.
I disagree with that. No, I would argue that democratic socialism probably does a better job. That it's a blend of socialism and a blend of capitalism that seems to do best, because capitalism, when it's unrestrained, when it turns around and then begins to hijack the political system, actually begins to close off competition and close off choices. And then the end result of that is a person who has natural talent can't break into the next level because they can't compete with the status quo.
I think you're losing sight with the idea of a large government. The large government is what reduces choices. The larger the government, the more power.
No.
The larger the government,
I want to respond to that.
The more power can be controlled. The more powerful the government is, the more power can be controlled by those with money. The less power the government has, the less power can be abused.
First of all, government can use its power for good as opposed to evil. The fact that the government is not necessarily inherently evil in and of itself. In fact, I think we would all agree it's quite necessary. The second thing to keep in mind is the absence of government does not mean the absence of power. Again, most people don't understand power, what it is or how it works. And I don't want to go into a whole nother lesson on power because that would be a whole nother discussion, but I think we are going to have to do this sometime soon. We're going to have to talk about power and what power really is and how it really works. Because even if I wave a magic wand and I do away with government, or I minimize government so that it's some sort of neoliberal, idealistic government where it barely exists and it just does the bare minimum, you're still going to be subjected to power. So it's not government that's bad, it's the abuse of power that is bad. And a private corporation can strip your rights. They can abuse power just as quickly and just as badly as a government.
Not without government's help.
But it can,
with
or without government's help.
Not as much as without government's help.
Oh, I disagree with you. Private corporations can be the government if you don't have a government.
Every example you've given has been because the corporation secured the power of the government to work for itself, but it was the power of the government that actually did the oppressing.
What if you're out in the middle of nowhere and there is no government, but there is a corporation?
And what? Where does that exist?
I'm not sure, but it's certainly theoretically possible, right? I mean, how much dystopian fiction...
Only if it's in theory.
Not necessarily. No, because I'm going to tell you that right now that while Earth has long been divided up into states, you can have the idea of a private corporation operating in a realm where government somehow does not operate. And if we can imagine this, we can also imagine the private corporation abusing its power over people. So government can be a vehicle for abuse, but it can also be a vehicle for justice and for protecting people from abuse. So government itself is just a tool, just like a firearm, Scott. It's not necessarily inherently evil or inherently good. It depends on how it is used. And an absence of government does not mean that you are not subject to power. Power is still going to influence and hold sway. So everything comes down to economics. So to say that economics has no bearing is frankly an astounding statement to me.
Never said it has no bearing. I'm saying choice has a stronger bearing than economics. It is more about choice than it is about economics. That's what this is showing. That's what the study is proving, and that's what common sense would say, that at least in the United States, where you have a system of government that legally allows you to, with your own innovation and your own choices, to elevate yourself out of whatever position you're in, or to devalue yourself because of bad choices. It can go both ways. You can make bad choices and devalue yourself, or you can make good choices and elevate yourself. The choices have a greater effect on the outcome than economics. That your choices have a greater effect on your success than simply the economics of where you're at. That's always been my point. I've never said that economics has nothing to do with it. I'm saying the more important thing is make better choices. If you make better choices, then economics plays a very little part. You make good choices, you can overcome whatever economic situation you're in.
So it sounds like we agree somewhere, but there's a big argument between where at in the middle we meet, because
what it is you've seen Ratatouille?
No.
You've never seen Ratatouille?
No, and I don't want to.
Oh my gosh! Well, you're not even gonna get. Oh my gosh! You're not even gonna get this reference. Okay, so I'm gonna explain it real quick. No, it's a great Pixar. It's a great Pixar movie.
I know.
And but basically, there is two main characters. One is Gusto, who is the chef, who writes a book called Anyone Can Cook, and there is a food critic named Ego, who completely disagrees. Says no, anyone cannot cook. It is an art. It is this and everything like that. And eventually, he basically takes away a star from his restaurant and sends the whole thing on there. But the idea is anyone can cook. And what Ego read from that is thinking Gusto says everyone can cook. And he's like, no, not anyone can cook. And what he learns in the movie, spoiler alert, what he learns in the movie is the real meaning of anyone can cook, which means it doesn't mean that everyone can do this. It doesn't mean that anyone can do it, but it does mean a good cook can come from anywhere. That the possibility of the choices that the people make, that you're hearing me say anyone can do it, and you're saying, no, Scott, not everyone can do it. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying everyone will do it. I'm saying anyone can if they choose. If they choose well, they can. But no, I'm not saying, and that's why I think you're getting caught up.
Isn't that a rat?
What?
Do you want a rat cooking?
It's a whole different thing. But
isn't that a cartoon about a rat that cooks?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, it's a great movie. But basically, the idea that I'm trying to get across is I'm saying choice has more of an effect than where you're from.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that everyone's going to do it. And you're trying, I get the feeling you're looking for an answer that says, how do we do it so everyone?
Well, the difference between you and I agree somewhere on this spectrum, because I do agree that individual choices are significant, but I don't want to let society and the establishment off the hook that easy and say it's all you, and if you are having a hard time, if you're struggling with poverty, it's all you, and too bad, so sad, you have to do it on your own. Because to me, that's a cop-out. Likewise, I imagine we could reverse the script and you could say the same thing to me, that if society bears all the responsibility, then it allows the individual to cop out.
Right. And here's the thing. If we follow your idea, it gives the excuse for them to cop out. You're telling them, no, you can't do it. Somebody else is holding you down. So that is devaluing them and discouraging them.
And if we follow your idea, then we're giving society an excuse and the establishment an excuse, and that allows you to devalue society and allow society and the establishment to cop out.
But doesn't matter. You become.
Society and the establishment becomes.
No.
Yes.
No, I'm saying. You choose to
I'm
become.
saying society and the establishment chooses.
You will become the society and the establishment. You can choose to
which is kind of the point of our show, which is kind of cool, right? Because if the individual changes, if the individual talks about ideas and they vote and they become the society and the establishment, we can get change, right?
Right. But that's what I'm saying is that all those people who are people who became. And you can choose to become.
Well, okay. So
Lance has offered a couple things here. The problem is I've been trying so hard to see more, and every time I hit see more, it asks me. I can't see all of what he's saying.
If I can
see if you can pull it up, and because I've got this on the screen, and I'm trying to be like, okay, Lance says this, but it says see more, and I tap see more, and it only lets me when you tap on it. Yeah.
Oh, it's for me because the show is not moving. Anyway, you've got to see the comment because you're tracking it real time.
Yeah.
The government role is infrastructure and defense. The more power we give the government. I imagine he's saying what you're saying. He's echoing you.
Yeah.
That the government role is infrastructure and defense. Well, infrastructure and defense can be very broadly construed. That's what I would reply to Lance. Yeah. And that, in fact, in the Constitution, it says to promote the general welfare. So promote the general welfare can promote the general welfare can be interpreted extraordinarily broadly. And again, the absence of government is not the absence of power. If we abolish the government today or tomorrow or whatever, there's still going to be the presence of power in this world, and power will be exerted upon you and your life to manipulate you and control you.
So before we go too far, I want to go back to this idea that you are skeptical of a Harvard study.
I'm skeptical, but I don't have any data with which to contradict
But
it.
you're skeptical because of your bias.
Absolutely, yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So this
Sure.
is a second point that I wanted to bring up that we've talked about before. I don't know that I totally agree. I mean, I agree with the conclusions, but I don't know how the study was done.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who the people were. I don't know the racial breakdown of what it was. I don't know who they asked. I do know that who you ask, or the question you ask, or how you ask the question,
Or how you draw the sample.
will severely skew the results.
Sure.
The difference is that now we are looking at a study that goes against your bias, and suddenly you're skeptical, like I usually am, against your your study that you keep saying, look, this is scientific evidence, Scott. This is the best way to figure it out. This is scientific evidence.
Scott,
And
I
now you find
agree that
yourself-
science is the best way to figure it out.
Right, but now you find yourself skeptical of it because you disagree.
I'm
with
personally skeptical, and I'd like to know more about how the study was performed, but that doesn't mean the study is an error.
it. Oh no, not only the study is error, but now you see why I don't accept on the face when you say, look at the conclusion of this study. I'm like, and you like, well, you're going to reject that? I'm like, I'm going to question it because I know this may be completely flawed.
It could be,
And I know that.
but I don't know.
And I'm being
In
facetious
fact,
by saying it backs me up.
I'm gonna give it, because it's a scientific study,
Yep.
and because of the prestige of the institution, I'm going to go ahead and give it deference and say it's probably right and I'm probably wrong. Now that's a faith-based statement, but science has mostly earned that kind of faith, because science tends to work the way it's supposed to. So until I have something to refute what you've essentially presented into evidence here, that stands.
What if you find it right?
Then I have to accept those conclusions whether I like them or not.
Will you?
I don't have a choice unless I want to live in a fantasy realm.
All right.
I don't want to live in fantasy. I want to live in reality, whether or not I like it. A lie is a lie, no matter how sweet it is. And I don't want to live in a kingdom of lies. I want to live in the truth, in reality.
So looking back at this, if we look at the other factors as we get into them, coping skills. Basically, what he says is in both samples, mature defenses were common among the happy, well, and virtually absent among the sad and sick. Talking about the coping strategies that are associated with maturity. I don't know exactly where that could come from, other than how you're raised. Like, how do you learn coping skills? Where does that come from?
Right.
It kind of associates back to that first one, was how you were raised, what your childhood was, and stuff like that.
So have good coping skills. Cultivate good coping skills.
Yeah.
But again, I suspect that underlying your propensity to acquire good coping skills is your socioeconomic status.
So you've never met any rich a-holes?
Oh, sure I have. Yeah, there's plenty of them.
So the socioeconomics. I mean, are there more rich a-holes or poor a-holes?
Well, here's one of the things though is I have a friend who recently had a car problem, and for her the car problem threatens to be catastrophic because she doesn't have money. So here she is on the verge of a nervous breakdown because her car problem is potentially catastrophic to her employment, to her paying rent and survival day to day. A wealthy people doesn't have this problem. They don't have it. So they don't even confront this issue as part of their day-to-day reality.
But it's all economies of scale. It's all economies of scale.
I'm sorry. If your car breaks down and you're rich, you can very easily repair your car. But if you're a poor person, it's a much different world.
Because
in other words, poor people have more existential crises than wealthy people do.
No.
Really? A wealthy person might lose some of their wealth.
You're making quite an assumption there. So wealthy people don't commit suicide.
Wealthy people don't necessarily face homelessness. They may face
Other
loss
things
of
like-
prestige, like I might lose my business, but there's
what
no
I'm saying
reason
is-
for them to end up homeless.
what
They
I'm
don't
saying
end
is
up homeless the same rate that poor
rich people
do.
don't end up homeless. Okay.
I mean, I
I'm
guess
saying
if you
it's
want to turn on,
economies of
trading
scale.
places or something.
It's economies of scale.
Sure.
And that's what you're not appreciating. You're not appreciating the economy of scale. You're looking at, well, here's this car that's worth this fixed amount of money, and for this person who makes this much, that's a drastic thing. For this person who makes this much, that's not a drastic thing. But there are these other things that happen that they deal with that these people will never deal with, that in economies of scale are just as devastating to them, because that's the world they live in. And those things can fluctuate all the time, but you don't have an appreciation for those things.
So
You don't seem to care about
if a
those
person with $10 million loses 90% of their income, they're going to live in a nicer house than you still. On the other hand, if a person who makes maybe $20,000 a year loses 90% of their income,
Right.
they're on the street. That's existential.
But what you're not taking into account, you're talking about the stress level. You are talking about how it feels. It doesn't matter how
A
much
person
you
who
lose.
has $10 million gets to go on vacation multiple times a year. A person with $20,000 doesn't get a vacation.
Economies of scale. You don't know the stresses that are.
Oh,
happening to
economies,
this
they
person.
can go to the park. You can have a staycation.
And you don't
Economies
know,
of
and
scale.
you don't, and you're not appreciating
You
the
can
stresses,
get cancer.
the economies of scale and stresses.
Get cancer. A person with 10 million can treat cancer.
Yeah,
A person
Steve
with
Jobs
20,000.
died of cancer.
I know. But
Steve
he also
Jobs died of
he
cancer.
also had
Come on.
everything he wanted, including the best doctors, the best health care,
And
the best
still-
palliative care.
and still
and
died
still died.
of cancer.
It still
You
died.
can't buy
but
your
his
way out of that.
experience, his end of life experience, I will guarantee, was many times better than a person who had $20,000.
No,
to
you
live on.
can't guarantee that, because my end of
Really?
life. Yes.
You're going to tell me
Yes,
that a
because-
poor person, a
No,
homeless
no,
person,
no,
or a person
because-
on the streets?
No, I'm saying that you're basing end of life experience only on money. That's where your problem
because
is.
you're telling
That's
me
where
money
your problem
doesn't
is.
matter, and I'm
No,
telling
I'm
you
saying
it does matter.
No, I am not saying money doesn't matter. I'm saying person matters. Your life matters. What you're going through matters. And there's an economy of scale that you are totally not taking into account. That a poor person surrounded by family is going to die well, and a rich person dying alone is not going to die well. And it has nothing to do with money.
Why would a
Has
rich
nothing to
person
do with
ever
money.
die alone when they can pay
They
people
do.
to be present?
All the time.
Find me an example. I don't know one.
Randolph Hearst.
Okay, and you're going to tell me, okay, would you
You're gonna
rather
tell me
die
that-
like Randolph Hearst?
No, alone by myself with no family.
In a
No.
massive mansion.
With nothing. No, I want to die like my father died, in a hospital bed surrounded by family.
Okay,
That's what I want.
so you're going to tell me
So
that
I'm telling you. So I'm saying.
Hearst's
you're-
life was less
No, we're talking about
fulfilling
death.
and
No,
enjoyable.
no, we were specifically talking
Oh,
about how
okay.
he died.
So, okay.
How he died. You were saying that people who are rich die better than people who are poor, and it has nothing to do with money. Has nothing to do with money.
So
You
how
said-
do you pay
You said poor people
for
die of
hospice
cancer.
care? How do you pay for palliative care? How do you pay for doctors to treat your illness if you don't have the money to do it?
You're still equating the happiness to the money. How you die.
It's
is
easier to be
not-
happy with money than with no money. And you're telling you that's the problem.
Money buys happiness, according to Marshall. You literally just said that. Money buys happiness.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. If you're rich and you have a bunch of money, let Marshall know how happy you are. Because all of your money, that's what we learned from everybody in Hollywood. That's what we learned from every rich person.
Yeah, because Hollywood is
how-
really good at spewing truth, not propaganda.
No, I'm saying the people in Hollywood, not the movies of Hollywood. The people of Hollywood who have millions and millions and millions of dollars and cannot find happiness.
But I know tons of poor people who, if they had just a few $100 a month extra, that they could do a lot more than they can without that. $100 to a poor person buys a lot of opportunities, whereas $100 to a rich person doesn't buy anything, economies of scale. So what I'm trying to tell you is that having money opens up a lot more possibilities and a lot more options. It allows you to go see a shrink, for example, or a doctor when you have the sniffles, things like that. It allows you to replace the battery or a broken part in your car.
Money
It
buys
allows
comforts, Josh says.
Yes,
Josh
it
Gunner
does.
said.
Absolutely.
Money buys comforts, yes.
It sure does. And again,
Absolutely.
that would be hospice care, palliative care, and so on. A person who does not have that extra income, that does not have that, a person who is choosing between literally food or medication, that's going to impact their happiness. And that's a money issue. It's about the economics. I don't know what choice you could make that would make $100 appear out of nowhere other than buy the right laser printer and snip it out yourself. So I'm not going to say that choices don't have an impact. I think they have a very significant impact. I think they're huge. But I also don't want to let the establishment off the hook, because things like this Harvard study are what they're going to blast out and make it go viral on social media to put the blame exclusively on you and to remove blame from people who shape this society and create the macroeconomic conditions that impact all of us.
Just like the studies on guns, they're going to falsely use those to do exactly that, to take the people off the hook and put it on guns. It's the same reason. It's the same thing. That we're on opposite sides of this argument now. You're finding yourself on the other side making the arguments that I normally do.
It's a great experience.
You like that?
Do you like it?
I like it that you're experiencing that, honestly. Because
do you like being on the winning side, the side with the science?
I'm not placing that much faith in it. I've been facetious in this. The point I've really been trying to make is the point that I'm making right now, which is that the studies...
Right.
This study happens to conclude with what I already believe in. And so I can quote these things and do all that, but it's not like, look, this study is now evidence for what I believe.
Well, the study isn't a consensus. There's no consensus here. There's a study.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean there's scientific consensus. So this study isn't going to carry the same weight as something like...
It's going to be a few decades before we can get scientific consensus because who else is making... Unless there's somebody who's been running a study
and there might
this
be.
long. And they might be, and they might be out there, and they might get more of
this doesn't have the same impact as, let's say, a study on the Big Bang Theory, a study on human evolution, a study on vaccines, a study on actually gun violence. Because when it comes to gun violence and they're equating the preponderance of weapons, the number of weapons we have in our society versus the violence and other things like that, whatever that may be, there's a lot more study on gun violence that's been done. Now, I wish there were actually more. I wish there were more comprehensive study. So there's still basis to question that. When it comes to this study with happiness being the result of individual choices, there's only one study. And so when there's only one study, it's appropriate to be skeptical until there's multiple studies and you have what we call scientific consensus. So there's no consensus here. So I don't think my skepticism is really out of bounds. However, I don't have contradictory scientific studies to refute this. So until that comes in, I have to sort of give this a pass.
Sorry, I was reading something and I wasn't laughing at you. I was reading at Lewis Goodman's comment. Nice smartwatch and clean clothes with your iPads talking about money. Ha, 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 ha.
Well, okay. Yeah, well, Scott and I are not exactly poor people. We're not exactly rich either, but we do have some means. Now, I don't know. Right. That doesn't mean we can't talk about money or poverty or other things. We've both experienced, certainly, we both came from poorer backgrounds. We're probably solidly middle class. We're probably solidly middle class. We're certainly not wealthy. That doesn't mean we can't talk about these ideas. No economic class has a monopoly on ideas. And so I invite everybody from the wealthy to the poor to talk about the same ideas.
Yes.
Because that's how we learn to empathize with each other.
Here's something that Josh Gunderson brings up that I'm kind of surprised you didn't bring up in opposition to this study, because I don't know how the study defines this. But Josh says the term happiness is vague and open to wide interpretation to begin with. And I have no idea how this... And I figured
well, in the pre-show, I was making the joke. Remember the joke that there's no such thing as happiness, that there's only degrees of suffering. Some people suffer less than others. But granted, that was a joke, but he's right.
It's the same argument Christians make, is that there is no such thing as evil. It's just a lack of good. That darkness is the lack of light.
I'm not actually making that argument here, though. What I am going to say is I would imagine that the paper would define happiness.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. And that's why I'm saying we have to try to find the full paper to find out how they define certain terms and how they determine their sample size.
In a deeper level, is there a way that we can actually put that much faith in any type of study that can have this many variables?
Yes. If the variables are clearly defined, if the units of the unknown are actually known, if they're defined, then yes, the purpose of science is to measure what is measurable and make measurable what is not.
Can you measure
happiness? If you can define it, you can measure it.
Can you accurately measure human interviews? Can you? Like, all of this information comes from asking humans questions.
Yes, you can.
Can you trust? Can you fully put trust in any type of study that relies on the answers of humans about themselves?
Absolutely. Well, what else do you have to go on?
That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying what else you have to go on. I'm saying, is it even possible to really get accurate?
I think so. That's why you have to have a large sample. The larger your sample, it's sort of like Phone a Friend, the lifeline on the TV
how
show.
large of a sample? I mean, if we're
The
talking
larger
about,
your sample, the more likely the answer that the audience gives is correct.
How large of a sample can you actually get?
Well, you have to at least be statistically significant.
1,000 people out of 300 million. I mean, that's statistically insignificant.
Well, I don't know how statistical significance is defined, and it may depend on the study. But if you have a statistically significant sample, and I'm going to guarantee you that a scientific study out of Harvard is statistically significant, because that's kind of like the very first thing you have to figure out. And
it's
so
a
I'm
relative term is what I'm getting at.
Sure it is.
It's a relative term in that, like...
Sure, and responses are going to be somewhat subjective.
And by nature, even though I've been jokingly throwing all these answers out at you as saying, see, I'm right because the study says so, by nature, I am skeptical of any study that relies on talking to people. Because I don't care if you get 100 people, 800 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people, you're still in a country of 300 million people. The amount of people you add.
What if you had all of them?
You can't. That's what I'm saying.
Because the human. So we're actually moving into
so I'm always
theory of knowledge here, ontology. You know, we're moving into how do you know what you know, which is kind of the question, which is an area where we're going to differ a little bit, I think, because to you, the subjectivity and the inability to know is so deep and profound that there's no way we can accurately quantify enough to base a reasonable decision.
In certain things.
Okay, sure.
That's what I'm saying.
And what I'm saying is,
I mean,
what better tool do we have?
But what I'm saying, I don't know that process is the best. I mean, because I know you get this many grams of this chemical and this many grams of this chemical in this atmosphere and poured in there.
That's ideal.
You're going to get a reaction. That's
an ideal scientific scenario.
Yeah. But I don't know that you can ever get an ideal scientific sample when you're dealing with humans.
Right, because the human experience is inherently subjective. Nonetheless, scientific researchers have figured out ways,
because he made us,
have figured out ways to sort of suss out things like trends and other important data from large populations. Behavioral scientists and other researchers who deal with humans, if humans are your primary research at the subject, there are ways to extract meaningful data from large sample sizes.
But again, you're just making a bet.
It's a pretty good bet. I would take it if I were you.
Okay.
You bet I would take it.
Well, all the social scientists are more dynamic than other fields. That's true, Josh. That's basically what you were saying.
But I would take that bet.
All right. Well, I guess I just like to put all on red.
And I'm not going to say that behavioral scientists and social scientists haven't been wrong. They've been wrong before. Oftentimes people are wrong in science, not because of a lack of integrity or data manipulation, but because there are variables that they simply didn't know about or think to include.
The think to include is always the one that because they already...
Which is why you have to have peer review.
There is more bias in behavioral sciences than in natural sciences.
There very well could be.
And there's always going to be that, because even if you're not trying to, you're asking the question from your bias. And you're already altering
even
the sample.
what question do you want to ask to begin with? What do you want to study to begin with?
Right.
Your biases are going to come out of that. And actually, if I were to study something, I would probably want to study something in the realm of economics, because that's my interest. It's my bias.
And that's where we come fundamentally, because again, I look at that and say, you can't, yes, to build this iPad, there is science, mechanical, engineering, physical, all the sciences that make this happen. And that's what science does well. But behavioral science and psychology, those sciences are just guessing. And I, who have a belief in God as our creator, I'm going to trust the creator on what he says about us more than I'm going to trust studies. Because my belief in a creator who knows his creation, I believe what the creator is going to say more than I trust.
Isn't that a massive appeal to authority?
Yes.
Okay.
The ultimate authority.
Right? Yeah, it's an ultimate logical fallacy. Appeal to authority is a logical fallacy.
Well,
do you want to double down on that?
Yes,
okay.
I do.
Fair enough.
Because
valid answer.
Because I cannot logically prove that there's a God. So, and if God did exist, if God did exist, you and I know he would be outside of our logic.
Oh, I don't know about that.
No, if there was a real God, the real God would not be limited by the logic of our brains.
Okay, so how do we know what we know? How do we know what's real and what's not, what's true and what's not, which is this huge, again, it's an ontological debate that we're getting into.
But I'm just saying, as we get, that's why.
Or is that epistemology? Ontology is how to be. I'm sorry, I've been using ontology in place of epistemology. Very bad.
And I'm ignorant enough that I don't know the difference.
Epistemology has to deal with knowledge and knowing and how do you know what you know.
Gotcha.
Whereas ontology is the study of being and choices and the choices that you make. So if it's an ontological question, it is a question about the choices that you make.
Okay.
And existential deals specifically with the reality of your being. So, for example, when I'm saying this is an existential threat, it's like a life-ending threat is what I mean. Like the very person or thing that you are is endangered because of the situation. That would be an existential threat.
Taking the observer out of observation has been impossible for science bit in the case of humanity. And I can't see the rest of the comment.
Right. Well, he's saying, that there's always going to be inherent bias. But again, remember this, the scientific method exists to correct for that, which is why you have to have multiple studies, not just one. And you have to have peer review, not just, I'm Harvard and I published it, because that's an appeal to authority fallacy.
All right. Well, there you go. I appeal to the authority of God. And I cannot get around that.
And I'm going to appeal to the knowledge of science.
This has been A Valid Answer with Scott and Marshall, talking about happiness and how you just can't ever obtain it, I guess. But you can catch us on...
You can have less suffering, especially if you catch us every Sunday at 5 o'clock. You can at least laugh at us and how I confuse my basic philosophical terms.
And how I'm ignorant enough to not even know the difference.
And spills water on his shirt.
Yeah, I'm going to spill water on your shirt one of these times. But it's going to be an accident. So until next time, catch us on kerncast.com. Follow us on Facebook at kerncast, or also at A Valid Answer. You can email us at avalidanswer@gmail.com. Till next time, Sundays at 5 o'clock. We'll catch you later.
Thank you.